Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to World of Tanks Blitz, and well, it's that time of year again. It is, basically Christmas. The Blitz Fair is coming very soon since a new update has just dropped, 6.6, which will shortly give us the new holiday background. As it is, we're still in the boring old garage, but we will soon get a new background with a new event, and of course all of the usual Blitz unfair, as I saw someone put it, the Blitz unfair coming to town. However, as is tradition, I will go through all of my tanks that I have accumulated since last Christmas, and I will state my favourites at each tier. So the usual, really. So starting up at tier 1 here, ignore the T28 E6 tier 10 heavy tank. I don't have that. Instead, we're looking at these tanks. And to be honest, most of tier 1 plays about the same. You can sort of group that, and that all together into the same thing because they're kind of the same. As you can see, they're all pretty much the same type of chassis, and they've all got pretty much the same type of gun and armour and all that. So yeah, nothing too spectacular there. And I did like the Vickers when I first played it, the Vickers Mark F. It was a pretty good tank to play. However, I think I'm actually going to go with the Hargo for my tier 1 tank. And you may be thinking, well, why not the Panzer II? That's because, well, I've just been having a bit more fun in the Hargo when I go down at this tier. Don't know why, because as you can see, I don't have it fully upgraded. I can easily get it fully upgraded. As you can see, when I go on to upgrades, I have, of course, unlocked the new turret and the new gun. However, I prefer it in its historical, as it were, loadout, which would have been this type of turret. No doubt they did put a couple of the other turrets onto the tanks, but I prefer how it looks in here, which means, yes, I'm gimping myself, but the gun is not too much different to the new gun to the new gun, which is, I think, the same. It's slightly bigger. No, yeah, it might actually be a slightly bigger gun. But it's got only 2 more pen and 5 more damage, slight better aim time, and a slight better reload speed. But honestly, it doesn't make that much of a difference at tier 1 when people don't really know what they're doing. So, and the armour is not great, but you can bounce stuff, and it's pretty much just a fun little cavalry tank to drive around in. Of course, Panzer II I will always love. However, I think the Hargo has just sort of taken it for this year. So moving on to tier 2. Tier 2 is... all of the low tiers are pretty difficult now to choose when so many of them have been made terrible by the big rebalance of low tiers, which, if you remember, I wasn't too happy about. I can see where they're coming from, but honestly, I just don't like, because it made, just to note, all of that redundant, because their guns are pea shooters and are really not worth the hassle of having. So at tier 2 there are a lot of good tanks to choose from. You've got the Universal Carrier, you've got the Tetrarch, the Micro Mouse. Of course, not that you can earn many of these. However, if you had them before the update, you kept them forever, pretty much, unless you sold them. And honestly, when I was grinding out some missions during the Halloween event, I was having the most fun in this, the Panzerjager I, with a pretty strong 50mm gun, the Pak 38 L60, either 50 or 47mm gun. I can't remember which one. Does it say? Yeah, 50mm. So it's got the 50mm gun, mounted on a chassis which is pretty mobile, to be honest. It's pretty mobile. The armour is not amazing. It's got pretty good concealment though, and the gun stats are pretty good. 6-second reload time, 67 average pen, enough to get through any tier 2 or 3 that you come up against. 65 average damage is a big chunk of health. Very quick aim time, very good accuracy. overall, it's a pretty good gun on a pretty good tank as well. Fairly mobile, of course, based off of the light tank, the Panzer I. It's just an all-round great tank with a great gun mounted on it. Of course, the universal carrier I do, of course, like as well with this AT gun, which is, I think, a 57mm or a 6-pounder. But it has got 60 average damage. It's got lower pen, lower average damage, worse aim time, and worse dispersion. Mounted on a fast, small, pretty fun chassis. However, the Panzerjager, I had more fun. I kept on going to the Panzerjager when I had to do tank destroyer missions, rather than, of course, the universal carrier or the FTAC, which very sad it doesn't have the meme gun, the auto-loading 25mm cannon, which is the only reason I kept it around, really. So yeah, overall, the Panzerjager is just my favourite tank at this tier. Sorry, Micro Mouse, you have been overtaken at last by the Panzerjager. So yeah, that's it for tier 2. Tier 3. Now, I had a difficult time picking tier 3 because it's not one of my favourite tiers. It's actually one of my least favourite tiers to go for, because there's just not a lot of tanks that I have or can get a hold of anymore that really interest me at this tier. You know, you've got the Panzer III, meh, that's pretty much become... FYI, the Panzer III has pretty much become the seal clubbing tank at tier 3. You see it everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Of course, you've got the cruiser, you've got the things for the Russians, what is it, BT7, you've got an M5 Stuart, you've got the M5A1 Stuart there. Sorry, no, you've got the Chiha, you've got the M5, the M5 Stuart, Panzer III, the BT7, you know, all of the usual, another Chiha. You've got the same tank twice if you ever wanted, for some reason. You've got the D2, and then you've got the 14TP, which was an alright tank. So yeah, it's not one of my favourite tiers, it's one of my least favourite tiers. There's not a lot of tanks that I can get a hold of, or that I have that are really particularly interesting. I still have this thing from when it was given away last year, and I have not played it ever, because it's just a worse off Panzer III in the regular tech tree, which is, like I say, the seal clubbing tank, which is why I refuse to play it. So honestly, there's not a lot of goat tanks that at this tier. I did have a game in the BTSV, a couple of games in the BTSV recently, and it was alright, but it's pretty much just a BT7 but with lower, but with worse gun depression, if that's ever possible. So I think the SU-76I will have to take it again, just through necessity, pretty much. There are, of course, other tanks at this tier, and before the rebalance, I might have said something like the Cruiser 4 with the 40mm Bofors, but not today. Instead, the SU-76I is my more favourite tank, because it's got a great 76mm gun with good penetration. Good penetration, 86mm. 120 average damage at this tier is pretty good. You can 2 or 3 shot people pretty easily at tier 3 or 2 with this gun. 4-second aim time, 0.38 dispersion, not that great reload. However, when it comes to the armour of this tank, it's where it takes it, because if you have a look, you have got, where is it? It's up here, is it? Yeah, main armour, 60mm at the front. It's the same as the Panzer III in the regular tech tree, which, like I keep on mentioning, is the seal clubbing tank of choice at the current meta. I don't know if any of you have noticed playing it low tiers, but yeah, so it is armed with a bigger gun. It's got the mobility still of the Panzer III. It's got the same armour as the Panzer III. It has, however, just got a bigger gun, and you're not as much of a sitting duck as you are in something like the FCM Pack 40, which has also got a great gun on it, but it is far more slower, far more unmanoeuvrable, which is why it is just a sort of worse tank destroyer at this tier. Of course, you've got the Marder, which I don't have, but some people might, and I'm sure people do enjoy their Marder. The first tank I ever got 5 kills in World of Tanks PC, bit of trivia there. But yeah, in Blitz now, SU-76I, unless you go for a Panzer III, you're not doing it right. the Su-76I is pretty much the other seal clubbing tank, which is the slightly more rare one to see. But yeah, so at tier 3, this has got to be my favourite tank. Now, moving on to tier 4, we get a bit more competition, because you have got some pretty good tanks that I do like, such as the AMX-40. You've got the B1 with its pretty good armour. Talking of good armour and a good gun combination, you've got the Matilda. The AMX-40 is just really nice and smooth and rounded when you don't have a camo that breaks it up like this. And then you've got things like the AC-1 Sentinel, which is kind of like a more mobile Matilda. And of course the Panzer B2, the premium version of the B1 in the German tech tree. Now, I'm going to go with the tank which I most recently got and kept, and that was the T6E1, which is kind of like, you can imagine it like a mini Sherman at this tier. You can kind of imagine it as a mini M4 Sherman at tier 4, because it's got a pretty good gun on it, which is the M2 L28A 75mm gun with 90 average pen, 120 average damage. With a slightly under 10-second reload time. The armour as well, not too bad. 76 at the front of the turret and 51 at the front of the hull. Like I say, it's pretty much just an M4 Sherman, but at a lower tier and slightly worse armour, I think. Or it might actually be the same. It might actually be the same armour as the M4 Sherman, which is pretty good. And when I did my garage review on this tank, or when I jumped into a battle first in this tank, I didn't think much of the penetration, being used to things like a sort of 135 average pen from tier 5 and up on 75mm guns. But honestly, at this tier, compared to other things like the A32, which has also got a 76mm gun, which has got 85 average pen with the AP and 120, but with worse accuracy and stuff, or indeed the AMX-40, which has got, 74 average pen? Or 88 average pen with AP. It's not that bad at all, really, in comparison. And it's on a pretty mobile chassis, and it's got pretty good armour as well. Obviously, that is a weak spot, as you would imagine, but honestly, it's pretty good armour for this tier. Like I keep saying, it is just basically an M4 Sherman, a mini M4 Sherman at this tier, and that's a pretty good accomplishment. I'd say that's pretty good to be called an M4 Sherman at tier 4. With a pretty decent gun. It's not too slow, not too fast. It's not too immobile. It's just a pretty good all-round tank. Of course, honourable mention would be AMX-40, because I do love me an AMX-40, especially when people in other AMX-40s don't know how to deal with you, and you just aim for there. But yeah, honestly, I think the T6E1 is probably my favourite tank at tier 4. Now we move on to tier 5, which is the first stiff competition to come up to, because there are a lot of tanks that I like, and it's a lot of tanks that are good at this tier. For example, you've got the Chinukai, which ages and ages ago was called the Shinobi, before the Chinukai was even a thing in Blitz. You've of course got the Churchill 3, the Churchill 1, which not a lot of people like for some reason, the Churchill 1. Don't know why. You've got the Su-85 I, which is a pretty good tier 5 tank destroyer, again based off of the Panzer III, but with a 85mm gun, as you would imagine. You've of course got the new Nightmare, which is the most OP thing at tier 5 currently, I think. You've got things like the Easy 4 Sherman. You've, of course, got the good old M4 Sherman. You've got the Panzer IV-G and the Hydro. Did those the wrong way around, never mind. And, of course, the things like the Wolverine as well, and the original OP thing at Tier 5, the 5/4, which is not quite as widespread anymore as it once was when it was released to everyone to buy in the tech tree. And it's difficult choosing a tank at this tier. I'm not going to do what everyone wants me to do, which is choose the Nightmare, because the Nightmare, it is fairly OP, and it's a pretty good tank, but I'm not going to go with it. It is a Stug, but with a howitzer that fires heat, and that's pretty good. However, I'm not going to go for it. Instead, let me think. because there are tanks that I do like. The Churchill, of course, that not a lot of people like for some reason. You of course got the Chinobi, and I can't remember what I went for last year, but I think it might actually be a tie between the Shinobi here and the Churchill one. And people might understand the Shinobi because it's got a great 75mm anti-tank gun mounted in that turret. But people might be thinking, why the Churchill? It's slow, it doesn't have particularly great armour for being a heavy tank. The gun is not that great. And let me show you why. Because yes, it doesn't have the greatest armour when you actually go into a battle, but where it counts, it has the armour. And this is a great high velocity 75 Vickers. 145 average pen, 160 average damage. That's pretty good. Great accuracy, 0.34, a fast aim time of 3.3 seconds. Reload time is a bit lacking, I will agree, 6.16 seconds, but it's faster than the Shinobi. Not that great gun depression, which is another reason why people won't like it. The front of the turret is only 127, but you can angle it and slope it. It's got open tracks, which means you get to track a lot, yes, but that track also acts as spaced armour, which is good for people shooting at you in the side or at an angled front, because if they don't hit anywhere on here, they will hit the track. And yes, it will blow off your track, but it'll save you taking damage, and that's the main point, and the main good point about the Churchill. And it says it has got 176 at the front, and technically that's not a lie, because it does. However, it's only around this 3-inch howitzer, which you can't use. This is all the extra bolted armor to the actual frontal armor, which I think is possibly the same as this, 127. However, even so, it's got a lot of health for this tier. The gun is not too shabby at all, with good pen and good damage. And I don't know, I just like the Churchills. I do well in the Churchill 1, could do well in the Churchill 3, do well in the Churchill 7 and Churchill 6. So, you know, I've got 4 Churchills. But yeah. Otherwise, it is the Shinobi, and the Shinobi, it's kind of the same as the Churchill. It's got not that great armour, but it's got a great gun. You know, gun 124 average pen, which is pretty good. You got 160 average damage, you've got 0.35 dispersion and 3.4 second aim time, which for a medium tank, not a tank destroyer, medium tank, is pretty good. Reload time is slower, however, it's 7.04 seconds. However, the gun is pretty punchy, and also the tank is pretty fast with, what armor was that? 76 at the front of the hull? That's the wrong button. 75 at the front of the turret and 50 at the front of the hull, which, yeah, is not great. However, I have got bounces in this thing, off the front and off the turret, which is good, I will say. It is good that you can get bounces in this thing, because, you know, it's great fun when they think, thinly armoured Japanese/Chinese tank, easy to deal with, and bounce. Yeah, because this front is fairly well sloped, actually. That's a fairly good sloping on it, which means that if you do get people at an angle like this, their guns can bounce off of this lower area here and this area, which means, yeah, it's just a pretty good tank. And also, it's one of my oldest tanks, the Shinobi, as its original name, which, yeah, it's quite an accomplishment. And yeah, I think this is just going to be my favourite tank at tier 5, tied with the Churchill, with the Churchill 1, and then also honourable mention of the Churchill 3 with the 76mm gun in place of the 6-pounder, because that's something that they added, which is cool, because you've still got the 6-pounder if you want it, but then you've also got a bigger damage, lower penetration 76mm. For when you need that little bit of extra damage, which is what I run it with. And it's pretty much the same sort of story as the Churchill 1. It's got the same sort of armour and stuff, except in this version, it has got these flimsy track guards over it, which is all they really were. They weren't really armour, because they were just bolted over the top of that. So yeah, if you think this counts as armour, you are mistaken, I'm afraid, because it's pretty much just track coverings, mud guards. But even so, it's still a pretty good tank, and pretty fun. And yeah, that's going to be it for tier 5. Moving on to tier 6 now, which I have got 21 of them. I think I've actually got, yeah, more tier 6s than tier 5s as we go up here. And again, there's a lot of stiff competition up here. You've of course got the Churchill Mark 7, you've got the gun carrier. No, not the gun carrier. You've got the Nashorn, the Jagdpanzer, you've got the Mark 6 Churchill, as well as the Mark 7 Churchill, which was all the way back down here. There you go, Mark 7 Churchill. We've of course got 131, we've got the Kuro Mori Mine, for tier 6 Tigers before we move on to the big boys. And yeah, you've just got a bunch of good tanks like the 4S here as well. And again, I have picked up some good tanks over this year. I can't remember when, but I think the 131 was new to this year. I think I also might have got the Kuro Mori Mine this year as well, but don't quote me on that. Also, of course, we got the Wi-Fi Firefly, which is a little bit of a letdown. I was hoping it would be a 17-pounder like the Firefly, also a pretty fun tank. And yeah, there's pretty stiff competition here, because there are a lot of tanks that I do like here. And I don't want to, but I feel like I'm leaning slightly towards the Kuro Mori Mine, and yes, it is the anime tiger. And I don't know why I prefer it over the Mark 7 Churchill. However, I have played a lot of the Tiger 1 at tier 7. I've also played a lot of the Churchill Mark 6 at this tier, as well as the Mark 1 down at the lower tier 5. However, the Kuro Mori Mine here with the 88mm gun and strong Tiger armor for this tier is pretty good. Now you may be thinking, why choose the anime tiger over 131? And that's because 131 is actually a slight downgrade compared to the Kuro. And in my review of the 131, I noted why. Because the armor doesn't change, but the engine does. And it's that engine change that is the bigger problem. Power to weight is 11.5 with a 650 horsepower engine, whereas for the Kuro you've got an engine power, or a power to weight of 13.1 with a 749 horsepower engine, which if I took off enhanced engine here, it would go down to 700. And that just seems strange to me. The gun is slightly different on the Kuro, I believe, 145, 220, same thing, but 0.36, 4.1, and 7.58 is the number to pay attention to there. Oh, and I've instantly forgotten those as I click the wrong button again. But then we look at this here, 7.58, 0.36, and 4.1. It's basically the same gun. However, the 131 is ever so slightly less maneuverable than the Kuro. It's not that much of a difference, but you notice it. After you've driven both tanks, you notice that there is a slight difference in how this thing drives compared to the Kuro. And the Kuro is slightly more maneuverable, which can mean the life or death of you when in a tier that is surrounded by medium tanks and pretty good, pretty mobile mediums, such as the Victory, Shermans, Panzer IVs, and things like Fireflies. And as much as I like 131, I think the Kuro is going to take it. Of course, the honourable mentions do of course go to the Mark 6 and Mark 7 Churchills, but the Kuro with its 88 gun doing 220 average damage with basically the same pen as the Churchills except more damage, is going to take it with the stronger armour. When side scraping, any armour can be strong, mostly, in the correct conditions, obviously. But yeah, at this tier, I think the Kuro is going to take it for me. Moving on to tier 7, where I've got the new highest number of 23, and again, even stiffer competition. Competition sort of gets steeper and steeper as I go up these tiers because there are more and more tanks that I like, hence why I've got more in the collection here. And we've got the newcomer, the Lycan, which is a pretty good heavy tank. I will admit it's not as OP as something like the Helsing, the Dracula, or the Predator in some regards. The Predator can be considered OP with a 90mm autoloader. However, there are also other good tanks. Of course, we've got the good old Tiger I with the Gamescom 2016 now, getting on to 4 years old, this camo, when it was first introduced, when I first got it. So, yeah. The Tiger, I of course like. I love. The Tiger P is also a pretty good tank. You've got the Gravedigger, which is also one of the more OP tanks at this tier. You've, of course, got the Mutant. We've got the good old Tankenstein. And we've got the T28 HTC. And, of course, everyone knows my favourite tank at this tier is going to be the Tankenstein. It always will. It always has been. And, well, it always has been since I started playing it with the buffs that it keeps on getting, which keep them coming. Let's make the Tankenstein OP from one of the worst tier 7s to one of the best. Of course, yeah, this thing's always going to be my number 1. So let's look at my number 2 spot. And my number 2 spot is, I think, to no one's surprise, going to be the Tiger I. Coming in close behind, probably going to be the HTC, actually, because the HTC, let's start with the HTC quick. The HTC is a tank which not a lot of people would say is OP in PC. A lot of people would probably say it's actually a pretty bad tank destroyer in PC. But in Blitz here, it's a pretty good tank destroyer. 200 plus mil at the front, great gun arc, great 105mm gun, I think it is, 105, yeah. Great 105mm gun for this tier. Combining it with a great gun arc and great frontal armour makes this thing the king of side scraping, or front scraping even. Because nothing at this tier, pretty much, is getting through that frontal armour when you're angling it like this around a corner. There is nothing getting through that. Because the weak spots are here, here, and these little things on top for the main weak spots at the front side, all of that rear, all of that front, very few things. And if you're side scraping it like this, with a building about here, that's if you're being really ballsy, but a building, say, sort of here, where your gun arc is, there's nothing getting through that. You can hold off alleyways time after time again by doing that. Even when you're frontal on, if you're wiggling the tank like that and someone's trying to aim for here, their shot is far more likely to hit the sloped side of the machine gun turret and bounce off like that, wasting their shot, rather than hitting it dead on and actually causing damage, which makes it one of the best side scraping tanks and one of my favourite tank destroyers in the game to play because of that. Moving on, we've of course got the good old Tiger, king of side scraping for heavies, with 80mm of side armour, which is great for side scraping. Frontal armour, not quite so good at front scraping, but the gun is very good. Long 88mm with over 200mm of pen at this tier is something to behold. Great penetration, great damage, with of course the good old 88. Pretty fast reload, I want to say. Yeah, 5.47 reload, pretty good. 2400 DPM, 0.3 dispersion, 4.5 second aim time, which is not quite what you want, but it'll do. Pretty fast for a heavy tank as well. You can relocate pretty easily. You can pump out that damage with that 5.5 second reload time. It is great. But then we come, of course, to the good old Tankenstein. Freak of nature, but we love it all the same. 130 naval gun. 540 average damage with this shell. Need I say more? 460 with this gun, with this pen, or with this shell. Need I say more? 17 second reload time, not quite what you want, but when you can vaporize half of the health of someone that you hit with a premium shell, I think that's pretty good. And it's one of the most balanced guns in terms of premium shells as well, because you're trading higher damage but for worse penetration, so it isn't a press 2 and win shell. It's a press 2 and do loads of damage shell. But it doesn't guarantee that you'll get through the enemy's armour. In fact, it actually lowers the guarantee that you'll get through someone's armour, which is why I don't feel quite as bad when I vaporise half of someone's health with the premium shell, because I know that it's not because I'm doing more damage, it's that I'm having to actually aim rather than just press 2 and win. Because some people might not like me for saying this, but I'm going to. Using the premium shells on this tank takes slightly more skill than using premium shells on any other tank. For example, there's the VK4503. The premium shells, the regular shells do 203, the premium shells do 237. If you can't get through someone with AP, you go for APCR. With this, if you can't get through someone's armor with AP, you're not getting through it with premium AP, because premium AP does more damage for less pen. And if you bounce that shot, you're wasting credits, pretty much. And so, yeah, that's why I say that for these premium shells, because, well, you know, it does take more careful aiming to hit things with this gun in general, but also to hit things and do damage with these premium shells if you're using them. As for accuracy, horribly inaccurate. 0.37, 5.5 second aim time, 17.06 second reload. Yeah. 171 average pen with AP, 196 with regular AP, 460 average damage with AP, 530 with regular AP, 600 with HE. You can quite easily do most of the health of a Rheinmetall with a regular HE shot. Not to mention the armour. 200mm frontal armour. It's a Tiger P chassis. And the Tiger P, ages ago, got a buff which meant that these side cheeks weren't 80mm like the rest of the side armour. They were 200, which means the entire front is 200 right here and right here. The front of the turret is only 150, I do believe. Yeah, 150 frontal turret, but if you go for this thing, you get basically loads of spaced armour on the front. And yeah, it's a monster, as it should be. But, you know, it's a great one. So there's that. Let's move on to Tier 8, which I have got 25 tanks now. Oh, we're going higher and higher in the numbers. And there's not quite a stiff competition here because there are a bunch of good tanks, but there's also a bunch of not-so-good tanks. For the good ones, we've of course got the Mutant Experimental, the Defenders, you know, we've got the M449, we've got the VK 1001P, the most OP thing at Tier 8, most people are saying currently. Of course got the King, you've got the 30, and yeah, you've got a couple of other tanks. As for not-so-great tanks, well, there's not quite as many as you may have thought. I don't particularly much like this thing, but I have it. I don't particularly much like the 112 Glacial because the gun wasn't that great, but they have now buffed it, which is good, so I might have to rethink on that. The M4, it's a pretty good medium, but it's not something that everyone would go out of their way to get. The same with the Centre for Disease Control, same with the 50T for being a medium as well. I don't see many of these around, so I doubt people particularly like the FCM. And then of course you've got your regular Panther 2s, you got this thing, which I got ages ago. But I think everyone knows for my favourite tank, it's going to be the King. Secondary run-ups, possibly the 30. I've been enjoying the 30 whilst I've been having it. And of course this thing is pretty OP as well. I do have to admit, you got me there, chap. As for some other tanks, the T28 Defender with its auto-loading 120 is a pretty unique tank, and it is pretty OP, I think we can all say, with that railgun right there. It looks impressive visually. Going up against it, not quite so impressive, because it's quite annoying. It's basically a better T28 experimental. But let's move on to the Tiger II, because, well, the Tiger II, I think, is going to be my favourite forever and ever. Unless they really nerf it, because the armour is great. 160 frontal hull side, 100, 220 frontal turret, 100 side. That's pretty good armour values. If you liked side scraping in the Tiger 1, Tiger 2 you're going to love it, because that's 20 more side armour. And that makes all the difference when side scraping. It is great at side scraping. The 105 has got fantastic penetration, 225 I think, with like 310 damage or something, which is pretty good at brawling with other tanks. Frontal sloped armour, yeah, that's pretty good. You can bounce shots off of there all day. The front of the turret is a pretty big weak spot, but then the front of the turret is like, what, 220 front, I think it said, which is pretty good. And all round, it's a pretty good tank. Not as mobile as you might like, but then it is, a heavy tank, weighs 70 tons with like a 780 horsepower engine. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem. But even so, it's still a pretty good tank. I don't really need to say much about this other than 128. 128 at tier 8 is pretty good. That's how much pen? 220 pen, but with more penetration. It's basically this gun, except with more damage, which is not quite fair. And not to mention the armour is great on it. It is coming up to mouse levels at this tier. 230 frontal turret, 160 side, 200 frontal hull, 130 side, 200 sloped at a pretty good angle. That's like 45, 50 degree frontal slope. That's easily 250 armour at the front there. This whole thing is sloped. Mouse weak spot is of course going to be right at the front where it slightly levels out. This is the weakest spot at the front of the turret, so aim for there if you're struggling, or of course the cupola. But even so, there's very few frontal weak spots. The lower glacis is always going to be a weak spot, so go for that if you're ever struggling. Top tip. Side, it's a massive target if you get it on the side, but it can easily just do that, and you struggle to get through that. I can agree when people say it's one of the most OP things. Ferdinand, however, it's a pretty good tank. Upper casemate, pretty strong. Frontal armour, 200. It's a Tiger P chassis, so yeah, 200 front, which is good, even at tier 8. 128 gun, that's pretty good. Tier 10, 128 gun, 10.7 second reload. It dishes out damage, and it can survive some hits. And it's got an alright gun arc, I would say. Not fantastic, but pretty good. And of course, that side armour you can sort of side scrape, but I wouldn't rely on it at this tier. Things can get through that if you side scrape too much, or over side scrape like that. Things can get through there, so just be wary of that. And yeah, that's pretty much all of my noticeable tanks at this tier. Of course, we got the Chieftain T95, which is a pretty unique heavy tank in how you play it compared to all the other ones here, where you sort of point the front and go. But yeah, there's it. Tier 9, we've only got 9 tanks, however, we have got some crackers in here. We've got the good old 4502B, my first ever Tier 9 tank. You've got the E75, which followed on, which is a up-armoured Tiger II, which means I'm going to like it regardless. You've of course got the Testudo, the Tortoise. You've got the Kampfpanzer 70, which I do like. It's a unique playstyle compared to the other heavy tanks at this tier, but it's a pretty good tank. Of course, got the Mauschen, which is one of the other OP things at tier 9, other than the E75 TS, I think. That's OP. I think most people can agree. That's an OP premium when it was around. And of course, the Jagdtiger. And honestly, I haven't played it as much as the other things, but I'm going to go with the Jagd for my tier 9 tank of choice. Next would probably be the E75, because it is basically an up-armoured Tiger II. Mauschen I do enjoy, but just due to how OP it is at this tier. Although maybe not quite as much as the VK 101P, but it is still pretty OP at this tier, I think most people would say. So I'm going to go with the Jagd, because it's not too OP, but it's pretty good. The gun, 7.31 second on a 128 with 276 average pen and 460 average damage, 0.31 accuracy, and a 4.7 second reload. Those are pretty good stats to have. And it's a long 128. It's got great gun. It's got a great gun on it. The armor is of course basically a Tiger II, but this upper casemate front is pretty strong as well. I think it's 250 frontal hull, but that is of course that upper casemate. The front of this is only 200, the same as the Tiger II. So bear that in mind. You can try and side scrape in this thing, but it won't necessarily work. But you can kind of side scrape in it. And yeah, other than that, not as mobile as some of the other tanks. It doesn't quite have the gun arc of a Testudo, nor does it quite have the armour of a Maushan. However, it has got a massively great gun and a strong upper casemate. If you can get this thing into a hull down position where you cover the front of the hull up to like here, you've got a pretty good solid bunker defence. And yeah, it's just the gun, how quick it fires is one of the best things about this tank. It can dish out mass damage very quickly. What's the DPS on this thing? Or DPM rather on this thing. 3,700. That's pretty good compared to something like the Maushan, which has got just over 2,000. Even compared to something like the Testudo with its 120, 3,400. The Jagdtiger outdoes it in about one shot extra, which is pretty good. So yeah, that's what I'd say for the Jagd. Of course, E75 will just go over it quick. Upscale Tiger 2, better frontal turret. Better frontal hull at a more extreme angle, better side armor, and a 128. That's all you really need to know. Bigger lower glacis, so bigger weak spot. However, even so, it's still a pretty good tank for this tier. And of course, the Maushan, I think we don't really need to say anything about it. It is a mouse at tier 9, I think, is the best way of describing it. 240 frontal turret, 200 frontal hull. Yeah, need I say more? And again, 128. But now we come to the final tier, tier 10, which I've only got 6. However, there are some strong contenders. Mark 6 Chieftain, 120 front, 120 gun, pretty good. Extreme sloping on that upper glacis. You've of course got the Death Star with the massive Doom cannon, and then of course we've got the Mouse and the E100. And I'm still going to go with the Mouse, and I'm not too sure why. If I'm honest, I'm not too sure why I'm still going to go with the Mouse. Maybe it's just because I've played it the most. Out of all of my other tier 10s, the E100 is a good tank. I do like it. That gun does a lot of damage when it hits, and the penetration is actually better than the 128 on the Mouse, since it does 640 average pen with AP. 640 average damage with that AP shot, but yeah, slightly longer reload, obviously being a 150 rather than 128. Chieftain Mark 6 is a good tank, don't get me wrong. I haven't quite mastered the playstyle of it, but I do like it. Death Star has got the fear factor, but if it gets spotted, you can pretty easily kill it. 127 max armor at the front of the hull. That's nothing at tier 10, I'm sorry. This thing is a pretty good tank. It's alright, the gun is great on it. I, again, haven't quite mastered the playstyle of playing this funny, heavy tank. It's not quite the same as playing a VK4502B, due to the side armor not being quite as good at this tier. Yeah, 101, when the VK had 120 at tier 9. So yeah, it's not quite as good there. However, I'm still going to go with the Mouse, because big tank, big gun, big profit. Usually, if your team supports you, because this is a tank where if your team dies, you're very unlikely to win it on your own, unless you're in a pretty good position, or you can relocate to like a corner where they can't really get you from behind or anything. It's got a great gun on it, 128. 258 average pen. Oh, they've buffed it. Nice. Since I last remembered, 258. That used to be like 246. So yeah, that's gone up. Or is that just my calibrated shells? No, that's just my calibrated shells. Ignore me. I'm being an idiot. 246 average pen without calibrated shells. 460 average damage, which is pretty good. Reload time not quite so good. DPM is not great. 2.2k. Dispersion, however, 0.36, which is pretty good. 4.5 second aim time. The armor, 240 frontal turret, 200 frontal hull, the same as the Maushan, but the Maushan wasn't in the game when I got this. So yeah, it's slow. It has got terrible power to weight, 9.3 power to weight ratio. However, gun handling on this is fantastic. You can easily snipe shots on the move, and that is the greatest part about this tank, because you can quite easily quick rundown how you play the mouse. You keep it in this position, pretty much. Turret aligned with the hull, and you side scrape like that. You bait their shots by moving it like that so that they think they can shoot at the turret cheeks, which is where the weak spots are. Right on the sort of midline of the turret cheeks, the same as the Maushan or the VK101P. The side cheeks of the mouse are the weak spot. So you bait people into shooting at it like that, and you try and bait them into aiming. You then turn, they fire, they bounce off the side. You then turn your turret, snapshot. Snapshot guaranteed pretty much to hit every time at medium to close range. Long range, you'll hit them fairly consistently, I find, but not guaranteed. Mid to short range, you're pretty much guaranteed to hit the tank somewhere, and usually you'll be able to pen. And that is the greatest part about this tank, because it's got the armour to just troll people, because you can just bounce shots all day, every day, off of the side and off the side, front, rear, like turret side, top, bottom, anywhere. I've had plenty of shots hit the side, hit the rear of the tank and bounce because I've just been waggling it around, and most shots will bounce because it's just so heavily armoured. And you can consistently snap shots at people, and it'll hit and most likely do damage or do something. And that's the greatest part about this tank. It's just got great gun handling. Some people won't like how slow it is, and I can understand that. It can be frustrating sometimes when you just can't move, and you know, people outflank you, or they get out of your range, or something, and you just can't quite pursue them. However, the armour is godly, and the gun handling is godly as well. And yeah, so that's that. This video is going to be long. I can assume all the other ones have been the same type. So yeah, out of my 143 tanks at the current time, not including the free one that we're going to be getting at some point over Christmas, out of my 143 tanks, those are my 10 or so favourites at each tier. So yeah, that's that. I'll thank you for watching, and goodbye.